Welcome to a brand new episode of Extreme Reloading. And in this episode, we're going to be focusing on case prep for precision rifle loads. Don't go away. In this season of Extreme Reloading, we are taking things from bare essentials through extreme reloading. And so far, we've been focusing on kind of the bare essentials. I've been noting places where, okay, you don't really need this and that, but really talking a lot about the bare essentials. And we just really did finish up talking about case prep. Lots of steps and lots of details were given in the last bunch of episodes. But as promised in our last episode, I'm going to be focusing this time on case prep for precision rifle loads. And we've talked a lot, and I've shown you a lot of the case preparation checklist that I use. And in many ways, the case preparation checklist for precision rifle loads is pretty darn similar. But I've kind of broken things down into phases. And each of those phases is a case prep in preparation for a kind of major step in the case prep overall process. So we're going to start off our checklist in very much the same way. It is important. Go ahead and put in the date that you're starting your case prep, and oftentimes you'll finish it up in one sitting. What cartridge are you working on? Well, I'm going to work on the .308 Winchester. And how many cases are starting throughout this case prep process? Keep those records, and if you ever need to refer back to them, if something went wrong out at the range or something went really right out at the range, you can see what did I do with that particular load or that particular batch, and either avoid it in the future or try to replicate it. So the first of those three major phases of this type of case prep is preparation, case prep for annealing. And we're going to start this off very, very similar way. Take those cases and carefully wipe them down. When we're wiping those cases down, we want to examine them. You're going to wipe them down, of course, but you're going to want to take a pretty good look at them. How's that neck looking? Take a look at the rim. Is the rim bent? That becomes more important if you're shooting semi-auto rifles. Take a look at that rim. If it's bent, you're probably going to need to discard that. It could cause a malfunction in the future. Anyway, you're going to take a pretty good look at that case itself. And one of the things, of course, that when we're really talking about case prep and cases, brass cases for precision rifle loads, we're oftentimes, normally, we're looking at premium rifle brass. And what do I think constitutes premium? Well, there are a couple of name brands of brass that do that. Number one on my list is Lapua. Lapua is excellent brass. I've been using it for years. Number two, also some really excellent brass is Alpha Munitions brass, ADG brass, another very good one. And another premium brass that I really haven't had a chance to work with ever yet, but I've heard lots of good things, so I'll just throw it in there, assuming all those good things are indeed true, is Peterson brass. I actually have some Peterson brass on order right now. Hope to get that in the not too distant future, and I'm going to see how good that brass is and how it stacks up to things like Lapua. Now, years ago, I would have also listed Norma in there as a premium brass. I no longer list that as a premium brass. It's an okay brass. It's a good brass, I guess, but it really has dropped in quality. I don't know the underlying reasons for that, but a lot of that Norma brass is just not up to snuff anymore. So that's what we're looking at. We're wiping that stuff down, and we've got an investment in that brass. Usually that brass is $1 to $2 a piece, so we want to take some pretty good care of it. And it will run its life, though. No brass case is going to last you forever, right? If you shoot any amount at all. And you're going to end up having to throw it away. And this is oftentimes where we see, okay, that's a major problem. I'm going to have to discard that piece of brass. So after we do that, we wipe those things down, and we've talked about that a lot, shown that, demonstrated that in the previous episodes. We're then going to lube that case in prep for resizing. I like to use the Hornady one-shot case lube. That's an excellent case lube. And then, while those cases are drying, we spray that up real nicely, let it dry just a little bit. I'm going to inspect the interior of those cases. We detect any cracks on the inside of that case. Again, normally that appears just above the web of the case, and the web is an interior part of that case. And so we'll feel that, and if we feel that, that case has got to go. And normally in that brand new or once or twice fired brass, we will not see that, but we still check that stuff. And then we're going to do a resize, full length resize. I've talked about that at length also. I no longer do neck sizing, do full length resizing on all my brass, and I'm going to do that. Now, this is where we also depart from bare essentials type of resizing. And here I'm going to use, in this case for the 308 Winchester, this is a Redding 308 Winchester full length competition. They call this full length sizing die. The difference about this, and it kind of looks from the outside like a normal die, but what it is, what's different about it, is this will unscrew. But I have a bushing inside here. This bushing in particular is 0.334 of an inch. This, after some experimentation, is an ideal size for my 308 Winchester when I'm shooting it in my Ruger precision rifle. So it helps me set the neck tension, start setting the neck tension for my this particular load in 308 Winchester. These are titanium coated mandrel, and you can get all different sorts of sizes. They just pop right out, put them right back in. I have quite a few different sizes. And if you're going to do this, I recommend, same thing, get a bunch of them, several of those sizes. Maybe start at 334, get some smaller, some larger, those sorts of things. And you'll be in good shape. You'll be able to find what neck tension, that'll help you find, I should say, what neck tension works really well and best for your rifle. What I mean there is gives you the best precision or the lowest dispersion. Now, after I have resized all of those cases, however many I'm doing in a batch, I'm then going to clean those ultrasonically. That's the method I use. I use an ultrasonic cleaner. Lots of different solutions out there. Hornady, Frankfurt Arsenal, Creedmoor Sports. There's probably some more, and some homemade recipes probably work fine as well. I'm going to clean that anyway. Now, since I have already removed the primer, cleaning that at that stage will also start to clean the primer pockets. We're not really completing that step yet. But what we're doing again is we are preparing those cases for annealing. Then, once I have those cases cleaned and completely dried, then I'm going to anneal. And I use the Annealies right here. This tool right here works really, really well for me. There are some much more expensive options out there that may work better. The AMP, Annealing Made Perfect machine, may work better. I don't know if that's true. Now, I should note that I've done a lot of experimentation with the annealings and different and with annealing in general. And I will say this, that annealing will help prolong the life of the brass. You're not most likely going to be seeing those splits in the necks. The necks are going to be more supple. They're going to take a little bit of that work a little bit better, and they should release that bullet more uniformly. But I have not seen any evidence with my own shooting, even with some other things other folks have posted. I have not seen a statistical difference in the dispersion of rounds, groups that have been fired where the brass was annealed versus where the brass was not annealed. So we do this step to prolong the life of the brass, that premium brass. No, you're not probably going to see a difference or a benefit with the size of your groups downrange. Now, some folks like to do this in a slightly different order. They like to anneal before they do full-length resizing. And I have a video out on that as well. Did an extensive test of order of operations. The link to that video is posted in the description below. But the gist of that one was the order of operations doesn't matter. By the time we get completely done with these cases, all these different steps, and we actually start reloading, they are at the exact same size, statistically not differentiable at all. But the argument goes like this. I'm going to resize first because I think the resizing process itself is going to impart some work hardening on the case necks. And so I want those case necks as soft and supple as plastic as possible. There's some real good evidence, really good research has been done to show that the process of resizing, working that brass, actually does start to remove the annealing, right? It starts to work harden that brass just a little bit, not the same as firing though, but it does start to change the hardness of the brass at the neck. The other approach is I'm worried that the whole annealing process is going to change the shape and stuff like this with the neck. That whole process is going to change the necks. So I'm going to anneal first, then I will resize and continue the whole process. That's the worry. I have not seen any evidence that that happens, and in fact I did that order of operations experiment and video simply to look if that was the case. So if you are going to anneal before you resize, you still want to get that spent primer out. It's a spent primer. Nothing should really go wrong with it, but you still want to remove or decap that case and get the primer out. How are you going to do that? Well, what we do there is we use something like this. This is the only Lee die that I own, and it is a relatively universal decapping die. And I can run those 308 Winchester cases into them and pop out the primers. Doesn't do any resizing at all. Doesn't do any resizing. But then I could clean that brass and then go ahead and do the annealing. And notice I talk about cleaning the brass before annealing. And the reason for that is particular perhaps to that Annealing machine. The way that the Annealing machine works is that brass case is turned in the flame, and what I noticed is if that case is not clean, that the case can start to turn and then it just stops and sits there. And that case is getting some flame really concentrated, and then it starts up a little bit again. if I have nice, clean cases and the wheels are clean, then the case turns very nicely, very uniformly, and the annealing flame does its job as it should. So that's why I make sure I clean the cases before I go into that annealing phase. Once I'm done with that annealing phase, those cases are pretty hot for a while, so oftentimes that will be the end of my session, at least for a couple hours. Let it completely cool before I go to the next step. Now the next step then, general case prep. I'm going to trim to length. Now, I could go ahead and put those in the gauge. Every one of my cases, I could put them in the gauge. I skipped that step for this because I'm going to use my L.E. Wilson trimmer right here, and I'm going to put every one of them through this, and if they need it, they need it. If they don't need it, I'll be able to feel that immediately and I can stop the process. It's actually faster to run every one of them through that rather than measure, this one needs trimming, this one doesn't. So for precision rifle loads, I run them all through my L.E. Wilson trimmer. And then, just like I've done and shown you a couple of times probably already this season, we head over to the case prep station, and what we do there is those 5 stations. I clean the primer pocket. It might have been a little bit cleaned by the ultrasonic cleaner, but it's never perfect coming out of that. Clean it, and then if I'm using milsurp type brass or I worry about there being a primer crimp on there, I'll run it into that second stage, but I'm using premium brass. It doesn't have a primer crimp, so I can skip that step, but I will not skip the primer pocket uniforming step. That's step number 3, the way I have it set up, and I will uniform those primer pockets and make sure I have a very uniform depth to those primer pockets. Now, one thing I will note, the Alpha Munitions brass uses a stepped primer pocket, I do not uniform the primer pockets when I'm using Alpha Munitions brass. So you got to pay attention what you're doing and know the nuances about that particular piece of brass. The Lapua, I will do that. ADG, I'll run the primer pocket uniforming tool on them. Then we flip that case over, a little bit of deburr, a little bit of chamfer, back to deburr, and then I run that case on the brush to remove a little bit of that brass shavings, brass dust that may be on the inside of that case, get that out as much as possible, and then that part is done, okay? But here's where we add another step to our what would be otherwise general case prep process, and that is to use this tool right here. This is a flash hole uniformer, and I use this only for my precision rifle loads. I don't think it really gives me any benefit for some of the other rounds that I might be loading. And actually what I notice is that some of those cases in the 5.56, the primer holes themselves aren't even drilled in the center of the primer pocket, which makes this not even really work. But what this does is we insert this from the inside, okay, the interior of that case, and just a little bit of twisting action, we make sure that that primer pocket flash hole is exactly the same size. And this also imparts a little bit of a chamfer on the inside, with the idea being that as that primer ignites, that the flash, the ignition source itself, will blast through the flash hole, but because it's chamfered out, it will, the idea being, it will more uniformly ignite the powder charge. I did a number of tests on primer pocket preparation, and this process really does work nicely, reducing the standard deviation in the groups that I was shooting. And of course, especially as we start shooting at range, driving down standard deviation is really important to reducing dispersion or improving the precision of our loads. And I'm still going to measure the case head expansion, make sure some cases haven't gotten too old and not taking a full resize. So we make sure that we still do that, and I record what the maximum size is for that batch. And I will also check the primer pockets themselves with my maximum gauge, my go, no-go gauges, the pin gauges that we talked about quite a bit in a previous episode of Extreme Reloading this season. And then, now this is another special step, we go ahead and expand the neck. So during the resizing process, we applied that mandrel to the outside of that neck, and we really did uniform the outside of those case necks. The next step that we're going to do, again, driving us toward as consistent as possible neck tension, what we're going to do is we're going to expand the necks. So what I'm using 21st century mandrels, are also called. That's the mandrel itself. The die is right here. This is the die that I have set up for my 308 Winchester. We just unscrew this right here. The mandrel pops right out. This happens to be 0.3060. That's the size that works really well for my Ruger precision rifle, and it expands that neck. Now, here's a very important point, and the reason why I use and we use premium brass for all of this is because this whole process of a neck mandrel during the resizing process and then an expander die, expander mandrel, just at the end of the case prep process, it wouldn't work if our brass had extremely variable or highly variable case neck thickness. We tend to see that with the cheaper brass. Hornady, Remington, Winchester, etc., etc. A lot of those things will have highly variable case neck thicknesses. We don't see that with the premium brass. We don't see that so much at all with Lapua, Alpha Munitions, ADG, extremely consistent stuff. So what we're doing is we are setting those cases up to be as absolutely consistent as possible at the neck, as absolutely consistent as possible at the primer pockets. And because we did a full-length resize, they should be, absolutely consistent or as consistent as possible, especially with nice high-quality dies. That whole case, when we get done with this thing, should be so consistent that we've gotten 98% or 99% perfect on all of these cases that we're preparing. You may not see any benefit at all if you're using inferior brass to begin with. We say you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, that sort of thing, right? Then, of course, one more cleaning. Yep, we're going to do one more cleaning. Final cleaning, again, ultrasonic cleaner. Run it through one more session. My cleaner runs 480 seconds on a session. That's 8 minutes. Do one more cleaning on that thing. Let it entirely dry. And then those cases are ready to reload. Well, that's what we're going to be tackling next time. We're going to actually start the reloading process. Thanks for watching.